Yes, I can. All right. MBTA Advisory Board,
Adriana, I'm sorry. Brian Kane, present.
Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham,
Dennis Betty, representing Metro West.
Metropolitan Area Planning Council,
Good morning, Eric Barassa with MAPC.
and then my roll call is out of date. I have Regional Transportation Advisory Council, but is that now Community Advisory Council? Okay,
Yeah,
community.
that would be the case. Carl Alexander, Vice Chair of the Advisory Council here.
Thank you. City of Boston
Running General with the City of Boston.
and MassDOT.
Sam Taylor with MassDOT.
All right, that calls the roll.
What about Arlington?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it must be out of date. Town of Arlington.
Yes, we were a recent addition, so yes, Leonard Higgins from
Okay.
Arlington. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think we have Burlington here as well.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, John Strauss representing Burlington and the North Suburban Planning Council.
John, welcome. Thanks for joining with us. Leonard, you need no introduction. A man of your reputation, the poet laureate.
By the way, I was
Transportation.
at Arlington's Poet Laureate's screening committee meeting yesterday, and I gotta
That's
tell
you.
you, those
That's
meetings,
you.
are exciting. They are.
There's no competition, Leonard. It's you. It is you. Okay. We've established a quorum. I'm going to call the meeting to order. I'm going to read all of our fun notifications. Dun, 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 dun. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. I'm going to now read the accessibility statement. This meeting is being recorded. This meeting is acceptable to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards. And let me tell you, those standards, Web and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodation in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Adriana Jacobson via the chat box or email at ajacobsen@ctps.org or by phone at 857-702-3663. Thank you. I will now read the virtual meeting guidelines. All participants join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Participants can mute and unmute themselves. Please always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please use the raised hand function. You can find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of your screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or in the reactions button in the toolbar, and I will call upon participants in the order I see you as best I can. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact insert name. No, please contact Adriana Jacobson via the chat box, via email at ajacobson@ctps.org, or 857-702-3663. My name is Brian Kane. I have the great honor to serve as the executive director of the MBTA Advisory Board, and we've done the roll call. Thank you, everybody. We have reached a quorum. Let me go out a little bit out of order and just welcome Carl and John. I haven't had the pleasure to meet you folks yet, but John, do you want to just say a few words and then to introduce yourself, and then I'll talk a little bit about what this committee does.
Thanks, Brian. A few words. No,
2 words.
Okay, 2 words. No, I'm representing the town of Burlington. You probably have been working with Melissa Tentakos for the past 500 years. She's so overwhelmed that she asked me to fill in for this particular segment of her duties for the town of Burlington. And I was happy to do that because I was on the town meeting transportation committee many years ago, and we started to formulate a plan to bring Burlington to a more of a modern age. Some of the things that I like to focus on, because Burlington is part of the little suburban belt. Linfield is another town like that. Some towns down the South Shore. I think it's the Three Rivers or whatever we call that area. And because we're neither in Boston nor out, we're kind of in between. So we're kind of a connection point between the outer ring and the inner cities. So we interact with other RTAs. And that's probably what I'd like to mostly focus on, is getting that kind of interaction going. So anyway, that's just a couple of words about me and a little bit about Burlington and what I'm looking forward to doing here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, John. Welcome. Carl, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Carl Alexander. I worked professionally as senior manager for Greenways at the Mystic River Watershed Association. Our motivations for joining the advisory council, which we had the great pleasure of being invited to do so, came mostly from a twofold lens. One is the intersectionality between environment and the externalities that transportation provides on the environment, and forming a relationship between the two, and providing that lens towards the advisory council. And then secondarily, in our geography of the Mystic River watershed, we host an incredible amount of state land and state transportation infrastructure. And so a lot of my day-to-day work is interacting with state agencies, municipal partners, and other stakeholders on advancing smart growth, transportation improvements for the region. So, looking forward to providing that active mobility lens, the environmental impacts lens, and also that geographic lens towards the work of the advisory council. And, unlike some of my peers on the advisory council, have the great fortunate ability to do so in a full-time position. So wanted to lend that additional capacity towards helping to lead the council in a vice chair role, and further help to better understand the work of the MPO, which it's been really great getting on board. And as it relates to today's meeting and others, I'm still getting my feet wet. So really appreciate kind of learning from all of you, and look forward to the prospect of meeting you in person or online in the future. Thank you so much.
Well, Carl, thanks so much for joining us, and we appreciate you being here. Leonard, you're I guess the other new member this year, but like I said, you need no introduction. So.
And that's fine, because I will save it for my questions, because I have a bunch.
No, really?
Yes. Oh, yeah, really.
I'm sure. So this is the Administration and Finance Committee, and I'll just I'll read our charge real quick so everyone sort of has a little grounding. This committee reviews and deliberates on all administrative and finance matters that come before the MPO board. This work includes reviewing the annual operating budget and quarterly updates, and addressing other matters raised by the board related to the administration and finances of the Boston Region MPO and its staff. So we're basically the internal facing kind of committee that tries to work with Tegan and Gina and all the wonderful people at CTPS to make sure that their budget is sufficient, and that we are just providing the proper sort of oversight as is required of any organization. It's not to say that we have concerns. It's just sort of what we do. And I think all of us in municipal government know that it's the right thing to do. So thank you all for being here. We're going to move on to agenda item number 2, which is public comments. If anybody would like to make a public comment, please use the raise hand function, and I would be delighted to call upon you. Okay, seeing none, we're going to close the public comment period. Thank you. And we'll move on to agenda item 3, which is approval of the May 29, 2025 minutes. I thought we had 2 sets of minutes today. Did we not agendize the 11/20/2025 meeting, or is it because that wasn't an actual meeting, there are no minutes?
I think it's also on the agenda. It's included it on the side of the slides, but maybe it wasn't in the formal agenda.
Okay, cool. So we will be voting on the May 29, 2025 meeting minutes and the 11/20/2025 meeting minutes. Mr. Eric Barras, I see your hand, sir.
I'll make a motion to approve the May 29th meeting minutes.
What about November 20th?
I mean, I can do them both. Yeah, I can make a motion to approve the May 29th, 2025, and the November 20th, 2025 meeting minutes.
Thank you, John.
Hey, John Strauss, I'll second the motion.
Thank you very much. Adriana, do you mind calling the roll, please?
Sure. Brian Kane,
Yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Okay.
sorry, I'll come back to Dennis. Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Carl Alexander,
Abstain because the advisory council had not yet formed.
sure. Jen Rowe,
I'll also abstain.
Sam Taylor,
Yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Diggins, yes.
John Strauss,
John Strauss, yes.
and I'll come back to Dennis Giambetti.
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Awesome, the motion passes.
Thank you, Adriana. And just to note, I did send in an edit to Ibu. Just want to make sure that the minutes that we approve reflect that. Just a quick little spelling change. So thank you very much. We'll move on to agenda item number 5, state fiscal year 2026 budget update, quarter 2, the amazing Haral Gandhi and the even more amazing Silva, whose name I will not try because I will butcher it, MPO staff presentation and discussion on the state fiscal year 2026 revenue and expenses through quarter 2. Please take it away, ladies.
Thanks, Brian. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to especially welcome our new members. My name is Haral Gandhi. I'm the Director of Finance and Operations, and I'm joined today by Silva Ivazian, our accountant. Today, we'll be providing a mid-year update on the operating budget and where we stand halfway through the current fiscal year. Next slide, please. So before getting into the details, I want to briefly just frame how to think about the operating budget. It's not designed to move evenly throughout the year. Instead, it flexes based on the timing of contracts, staffing transitions, and when costs are recognized. And because of that, there is some variability across quarters, especially in the first half of the year. It's expected and it's part of our normal operating cycle. So with that context, I'll offer a high-level snapshot through quarter 2 of the state fiscal year. Overall, the budget remains in a healthy position and is performing in line with our expectations for this point in time. We closed quarter 1 with a surplus, and in quarter 2, we strategically balanced the budget to support operations, including recognizing certain costs in a way that better aligns with actual spending patterns over the course of the year. Staffing transitions have also influenced the budget, particularly in terms of when vacancies are filled and how work is charged to the contracts. This is normal. This is a normal dynamic we manage each year as we recruit and add capacity to support current and upcoming work. We will continue to monitor our assumptions on both the revenue and expense sides, particularly as new contracts are executed and existing agreements are extended. If adjustments are needed, we will bring those forward for discussion at future meetings. And then in parallel, we are currently developing the state fiscal year 27 operating budget. We plan to bring that forward at the next meeting for discussion and approval. With that, I'll turn it over to Silva to walk us through the operating budget in more detail and highlight the key drivers and areas where we are watching as we move into the second half of the fiscal year. Silva?
Great, thank you, Haral. Good morning, everyone. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'll begin the update by first looking at the state fiscal year broken down by quarter. As you can see, we ended quarter 1 with a surplus, which we typically expect to see at the beginning of the state fiscal year. In quarter 2, we strategically balanced performance across the first half of the fiscal year by recognizing several major prepaid costs entirely in this quarter, rather than spreading them out across the year. As Haral mentioned earlier, this pattern of having a surplus in quarter 1 and a shift in quarter 2 is very consistent with how our operating budget usually performs the beginning of the state fiscal year. As a reminder, quarter 2 includes the months of October, November, and December, which not only is the start of the federal fiscal year, but it also includes several holidays and scheduled time off, which naturally affects the timing of both revenue and expenses compared to other quarters. As we move into the next few slides, I'll be able to walk through the revenue and expenses in more detail. Overall, through quarter 2, our financial position has remained stable and in line with expectations. We closed the quarter with a healthy overhead rate of 121.08%, which is very close to our approved overhead rate of 122.59 and reflects a strong alignment between revenue and expenses. As we move into the next quarters, we do expect the year-to-date position to balance out, especially in quarter 3, as we expect project activity to ramp up. Next slide, please. Thank you. Great. This slide shows our revenue through quarter 2, comparing projected revenue shown in the solid bars to actual revenue shown in the polka dot bars across each funding category. As a reminder, our projections are based on a straight line assumption and are used merely as a planning tool, while actuals reflect the timing of work, contract activity, and actual time charged. Starting with the MPO and MassDOT directed 5303 category, we charged approximately 96% of our projections, which is in line with expectations, and this level of activity is consistent with the timing of this funding source. In the MassDOT statewide planning and research category, we've charged approximately 80% of the projections, reflecting the timing of work as it is requested and completed. In the MassDOT other category, which includes the MassDOT on-call contract, we originally expected this contract to end in December. However, it is now being extended through the end of the state fiscal year based on project and client needs. Through quarter 2, we're at approximately 62% of the projection, and we're actively working to complete remaining tasks as they are required by the client. In the MBTA category, we've charged approximately 109% of the projections through quarter 2. During the initial budget development process, we had anticipated activity across 10 MBTA contracts, which we do have, but in addition, we have received an additional extra service equity request from the MBTA, and several contract budgets came in higher than originally anticipated, which contributed to the increased activity in this category. In the other category, which includes the MVP and Safe Streets for All grant, it's at approximately 179% of our projection through quarter 2. We are now in phase 2 of the MVP contract, and also the timeline for the Safe Streets for All grant has changed. We had anticipated this funding source to end June 30, 2025, but it has since been extended, and the new end date for this Safe Streets for All grant is actually June 30, 2026. Overall, through quarter 2, total revenue came in at 102% of our projections. Now that we have a clearer picture of our revenue sources based on historical data and future expectations, we do plan to propose an adjustment to our budget assumptions in the next quarter to better reflect actual revenue trends. But again, while individual categories may trend above or below straight line projections, the overall revenue picture remains stable and balanced. Next slide, please. Thank you. Great. This slide shows our expenses through quarter 2, comparing projected expenses to actual expenses across our 3 main categories, including admin expenses, direct labor, and direct costs. Starting with admin expenses, these reflect our typical operating expenses, which came in at approximately 94% of our projections. Moving to direct labor, which includes staff salaries charged directly to contracts. We came in at approximately 95% of our projections. This is largely driven by our current staffing levels. Right now, we are recruiting for several vacancies, 3 of which are primarily supporting contract work, which we're working actively to fill. In the direct costs category, we're at approximately 173% of our projections, which is primarily due to timing. This category includes paying consultants for MVP and Safe Streets for All work, along with the use of the obligated funds. Additionally, because quarter 2 marks the beginning of the federal fiscal year, there are a few expenses, such as the agency membership dues, which naturally increase the activity for this quarter in this category. As you can see, admin expenses and direct labor are tracking as expected per this graph. The variance is really concentrated in the direct costs category due to continued Safe Streets for All activity following the contract extension and the timeline change. Overall, total expenses through Q2 came in at 102% of our projections, which matched our revenue performance perfectly. This alignment between revenue and expenses reinforces that our operating budget remains balanced through this quarter. As always, we will continue to closely monitor the operating budget and make strategic adjustments as we continue into the next few quarters to ensure that we remain aligned with our financial agency goals. Next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you all for your time and attention, and we'll take any questions that you may have at this time.
Well, thank you, Silva. Thank you, Haral. When you talk about using Q2 to balance, is that mostly in the direct cost sort of quartile or section, or where would you suggest, or where do you plan to do most of that balancing in?
Yeah, I can take that. So in Q2, what we did was we recognized some of the expenses that we call prepaid expenses. So anything that we charge over the course of 12 months, we recognize those in Q2 so that we have more room and the overhead rate is balanced. So we just we manage some of the expenses by recognizing those expenses at certain times of the year.
Okay. So it's just like a prepaid expense sort of recognition thing. Cool.
Yes.
Got it. And I mean, look you've heard me say this before. Coming in within 5% is really good as far as I'm concerned, with this much time left, this much runway left in the fiscal year to kind of make those adjustments. I applaud you for sort of staying on top of this and working on it on a day-to-day basis. And you folks are good at this, as I've said. So anybody have any questions for Haral or Silva? Len Diggins, I'm looking at you.
My questions are coming in later, but since you have me talking, I just want to say, not only were they orange bars in contrast to the solid blue bars, but they were orange polka dot bars, and I really like that. Thank you.
Aesthetically pleasing to Len. Let the minutes reflect. Len is aesthetically pleased. Cool. What are your concerns sort of for the rest of the fiscal year, Haral or Silva?
I think just staying on top of the staffing assumptions and trying to recruit actively to make sure that we bring in and charge out the contracts that we have projected for. So in the short term, I think as Scylla mentioned, we have 5 active recruitments, but also reviewing our assumptions for the rest of the year to account for any additional grants and staffing levels. So, but making an adjustment if needed.
And in terms of, Tegan, I see your hand. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just going to offer to add to that a bit. I share what Haral said. And also, I think it's just interesting for this group to know that these significant grants, these Safe Streets and Roads for All grants, and the PPPP grant, which I always struggle to come up with it without reading what the PPP stands for, but Process Pilot Program, something to that effect, pardon me. They are pretty large in scale, and also they've been a little bit unpredictable in terms of when they'll come into play and be under contract. So we are still working to get all 3 of our current grants. That's the second and third SS Furry grant, as well as the PPP grant underway. So that is a really tricky thing from a capacity perspective. If they all come in at the same time and we need to ramp all of them up at the same time, we're thinking kind of constantly about what sort of capacity we need on staff and how we thank you, Adriana, for project prioritization pilot program. But yeah, we're thinking about how to be able to effectively ramp up and manage that, given that it's also a multi-year, but still, confined time frame. And we're keeping a close eye on reauthorization. And I'm encouraged by the recent release of the BASICS Act. I also won't try to say that acronym in this forum, but basically, if it is built into reauthorization, if It looks to be promoting more formula funding, which would be that sort of very reliable, consistent funding that we receive as an MPO.
So that was my next question, actually, Tegan. You sort of teed me up well there. I mean, what else in terms of unexpected costs or unknowns are looming out there that we as a committee should be sort of paying attention to?
Well, one of the big things is that, and I'm not talking about this as much in my updates now, but it's been a very long ongoing process, is that we are also still looking into what will happen with our office space, whether we are going to be modifying our office space at Mass DOT or considering moving to another location. So we had an unsuccessful run at releasing an RFP to get quotes. I think we're learning, the procurement side is learning as we move along. And so we're thinking about now what is an effective way to get some real bids basically on what kind of office space we can have, or we can work with MassDOT on our space. So that can be a huge impact. And then, yeah, maybe Haral, there's some other things that you can think of, but that's a big one I'm thinking about.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
I mean, having fixity of costs, especially in the environment and with the setup that we have, is really important. And you know, you folks all know that I've been advocating for a fixed lease for your office space for a long time, as well as other fixed costs as much as possible. So I think we as a committee will continue, at least I as the committee chair will continue to be as supportive as possible in you folks locking down a lease, whether it's at 10 Park Plaza or elsewhere. I just think that is one of those final sort of things that we need to push the MPO on in terms of getting things written down, in terms of getting things documented, historic, you know, and agendized and with historical precedents and everything like that. For far too long, the organization has operated sort of on a, well, we've always done it this way process. And it's not to say it's the wrong way, but I think any of us in local government understand the importance of getting things written down, just because things change and folks move on, and it's important that we memorialize these things. So, okay. John, I see your hand. Go ahead, please, sir.
Thanks, Brian. I just had a fast question. With all the articles that you read online about Boston having a lot of suddenly vacant space that they want to turn into apartments, do we feel that this is going to be a good time for us to write a strong proposal? And I mean, I'm just new to this, so I don't know how much space that's going to be needed, but I would think that this would be a very advantageous time to go ahead and do something.
I mean, yeah, there's good times and there's not so good times. I think this is a good time in terms of where the market is. Like, there are certain other challenges, John, that I'd be happy to talk to you about sort of offline sometime, that limit the organization's ability to make decisions that, even though it might be in the best interest of the organization, they're not allowed to do. So let me leave it at that, and maybe we could have a talk sometime about what those are. Any other questions for Haral or Silva? Do we vote to accept this report or approve it, or is it just an update? I forget.
It's just an update. Next time when we present the budget for next year, that's when we do the approval.
Righty then. So we'll move on to our next agenda item. Thank you, Haral. Thank you, Silva, which is the Executive Director Goals Update from Tegan Tyke. Tegan, please take it away.
Thanks, Brian. And hi, everyone. Just in case anybody on here we haven't met before, that could be at least maybe one person. I'm Tegan Tyke, and I'm the Executive Director of the staff to the Boston Region MPO. And back in state fiscal year 2024, after some updates to our operations plan, or the creation of an operations plan, I should say, I began giving this committee quarterly updates on progress towards the goals that I set in my review process. You'll notice that it says quarterly, but the months associated with my update are no longer aligning perfectly with the quarters that we are using for the financial analysis. And that's because my updates are different. The financial reports require closing books and doing some processing. But in terms of advancements toward my goal, I can report up until the time right before the meeting, right, in terms of what we've been doing. So for this meeting, I'm talking about November 2025 through January 2026, since we last met in November. And then also just recognizing that we have some new committee members, I hope you're able to take a look at the memo for today. In the past, each presentation and each memo, I've reminded us about the details of my review process and each goal I've set before I provide the updates. But for efficiency, I maybe picked the wrong meeting, but to start to pivot towards not recapping that every time, but instead refers to a prior memo that has all of that information. So I'm hoping to kind of trim that and just sort of move forward with updates. So I will do that, and then I will happily go back and answer any questions. And if this approach doesn't work for you, let me know. So next slide, please. So again, timeframe November through January, and I will be talking about progress towards goals in these areas, which still line up with our strategic plan, this is our last year of implementing the strategic plan. So I may think about that framework differently going forward. But those categories are identity and awareness, programs and services, governance, organizational structure and staffing, diversity, equity and inclusion, and funding and opportunities. All right, next slide, please. So let's jump into the advancements we've been making in the space of refining the identity of and raising awareness of the MPO. One of the things I explicitly call out in terms of my goals is maintaining professional development investments because, obviously there have been questions for some organizations during these times of fiscal challenges and uncertainty, but in addition to those investments being staff-centric, there are also really strong opportunities for us to share our work, to participate in peer exchanges across the country, and raise awareness of the work that we do for new audiences. That said, over the last several months, we've sent less people than we did in the fall to conferences, but frankly, there are just more conferences in the fall, and the annual AMPO conference was nearby in the fall, and so we sent quite a few people to that conference in Providence. But we did send 2 staff over the last couple of months to the Southern New England Planning Association conference, the SNEPA conference, as well as 2 staff to the Transportation Research Board, or TRB, annual meeting. These are big ones that we try to attend every year. But then also what I wanted to highlight here is that I intended the first, for me, Massachusetts Municipal Association annual conference called Connect 351. And I talked about it a little bit in the ED report, the executive director's report at the board meeting, but just to recap slightly, I really do want to emphasize it was new to me, and I've received some encouragement by Brian Kane and others to go and attend, and I found it to be a really valuable forum to connect with several board members, and we spent time connecting in a way we hadn't had an opportunity to in the past, and then also just meeting leadership, elected officials, and staff from tons of different municipalities, most of which were within our region. And so I kind of realized how many people in our region don't yet know about the MPO as an important resource, and realizing that this is another forum that we really need to be engaged in to make sure we're spreading that word. And then still on this slide, at the annual TRB conference, our own Marty Milkovits received the Zephyr Leadership Award. This is obviously amazing for him, but also it boosts our agency as well and the work that he's done for us. He's been integral in transforming the perception of our work, particularly in travel demand modeling, by working to create new tools and breaking open what had in the past been more of a black box. So I think that's raised a lot of transparency and credibility with stakeholders and just an essential part of our identity as an organization. The award also recognizes how Marty's been helping to launch a new conference called Modeling Mobility as a co-chair. And it basically recognizes that he's leading the industry in the space of modeling under uncertainty and exploratory modeling. So the cutting edge work that he engages in, that his team engages in, again, really elevates the MPO across the country. And we're very happy to have him. And we're continuing to invest in our new modeling tools now through deobligated PL funds and regular PL funding. And then lastly, on this site, on this page, we know that many people first encounter us through the web. So I've been talking to you about a redesign of our website. That's part of our branding and agency presence goal. And I've been reporting that we had a consultant on board. And since my last report, the consultant finished the redesign work. But now we are working on refining content and developing new content where needed for the newly structured website. Next slide, please. In programs and services, I have also been regularly reporting to this committee about our journey of creating new systems for agency-wide collaboration on all the work that we do. This is something I heard when I was a board member and when I first came into this position, that there could be a lot more integration and coordination between the different buckets of work that we do. And that's not easy given the scale of our work. But I've talked about the development over the last year, year and a half of 13 different multi-year plans, which are 3 to 5 year looks at most of, but not all of the work that we do in an agency, but a lot of the core central programs that we talk about in the UPWP are captured within these multi-year plans. So over the last several months, we've asked all the authors work with their supervisors to update all those plans and shared them with the leadership team. We've reviewed them. And then we piloted a new coordination process this year by sort of formally bringing together the authors of a subset of those plans with their supervisors and the leadership team over multiple meetings to identify where increased coordination between those programs will improve outcomes. So far, the staff that were engaged in it that I've spoken to have reported back that it was incredibly useful. And so we're looking for more feedback and thinking about how we can replicate this process or scale it up year over year with different combinations of multi-year plans. And then also, the priority of what is our evolving agency action plan, which I've been talking about for a few years. It's a really big lift to sort of pull this plan together. And what we've done is we've refined how we're thinking about those priorities being captured now as strategic initiatives. So we're working on now developing a framework on how to advance an agency-wide strategic initiative, starting with one of our focus areas, our strategic initiatives that I've also discussed at the annual meeting, which is creating a really consistent pipeline, strong pipeline from our planning work, all of our planning work, all the way through to implementation and funding construction. And so the goal is that the MPO's investments at all stages from planning onward lead to constructed projects that advance regional goals. So I'm pleased that we've kicked off fleshing out a structure for that strategic initiative development with 2 managers who are collaborating on developing a work plan and working closely with the leadership team before we then expand out the initiative to staff more broadly. Next slide. So on to the governance goal, which for my review, my goal is really focused on board engagement. And that's because I believe that is a way to empower board members to make informed decisions. So part of this engagement, increased engagement, we had our 3rd annual meeting in December. This is something that came out of deliberations during our operations plan. And some of you, including Brian, really advocated for establishing these in-person annual meetings as a way to really celebrate the work of the MPO and build connections and relationships and empower the board. And I think that meeting went quite well. We're currently processing feedback. I will say this time we also enjoyed facilitating a real cross-agency panel for the first time, which I think demonstrated a strong partnership between the MPO, the state, municipalities in making sure that we're advancing projects to construction. And also my goal in this area is focused on the UPWP committee. We've been working with evolving the role of the UPWP committee members to be more engaged, not only in the discrete studies, but also all work of the MPO and also the work that MEPC carries out that's funded with PL dollars. So it's great to see, Eric, you're here, but MEPC attended a recent UPWP committee and talked about how the money invested from PL dollars into MEPC work has been used for projects that are also really relevant to advance the region. And we're also expanding our kind of coordination across our work to make sure that we're supporting and supplementing each other and not accidentally duplicating each other's work. So that's been a really positive process. And then finally, we are also supplementing the ongoing sub-regional coordination work in collaboration with MEPC. We've added an additional transportation-focused fall session that we engaged our sub-regional board representatives in. It was both a region-wide forum and we engaged with them to help facilitate sub-regional breakouts. And we've also heard really good feedback from that meeting so far. And I think it helped empower our board members to connect with their sub-regions and bring what they learned back to the board. Then next in organizational structure and staffing, my goals have been centered more around the compensation plan and this year continuing a comprehensive update of the compensation plan. We created our first compensation plan, I think it was roughly 4 years ago. And the goal is to lay out a structure for, well, what it does is it lays out a structure for job tracks and compensation for all staff at the agency to be as transparent as possible and to empower staff members as well to have some agency in terms of talking about their own advancement along job tracks. So while we adjust the associated salary ranges in that structure each year, sometimes more comprehensive updates are needed. So the leadership team members have been engaging a consultant for a job descriptions workshop. Over the last couple of months, we also carried out an agency-wide job description refresh, which is an important and strong foundation, not only for the compensation plan, but also for our evaluation processes when we're doing performance assessments. We're also drafting the remaining scoped tasks for this year for that compensation plan update, which will include updating some of the career tracks, better describing advancement within job tracks, and some additional all-staff education about what informs the compensation plan and best practices and how to apply it. So next slide, please. This is my last slide, just so you know. So our diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility work over the last several months and beyond has been focused on ramping up the internal working group that we have established called the IDEAS Group, but ramping up their role, particularly in implementing, thanks, Eric, see you, in implementing some of the recommendations of the recently completed DI action plan and the equity review of our agency's policies and procedures. So we've been working with them. A work plan's been drafted. The timeline was extended a little bit over these past several months due to some unplanned staff outage, but that's something I'll look forward to reporting on in the spring. And then finally, in this last category of funding and operations, we, as you just saw, continue to be successful in managing our overall position to be in a surplus or deficit of less than 5%. That's really our my primary focus here, and I'm proud to see that we are doing well in that regard, especially in uncertain times. I'd also mentioned that there is some communications challenges last time I reported that led to a delay in our combined 3C contract getting to us, but we have we've worked that out. We've increased some communications, and we now have our contract and the advance that boosts our cash flow. So we're in a really great position right now for the rest of the year. And then, as I mentioned, fiscal instability. One of my goals this year was to make sure I was finding ways that I could reinforce the stability that we have in this uncertain time. And we've been fortunate, as I briefly mentioned before, that the federal formula dollars are still there. They've remained relatively flat. But then we're able to continue to diversify our funding and supplement it with other revenue. Again, we got a new award of a third Safe Streets and Roads for All grant in the last couple of months. And we're working with the feds now on the updated terms and conditions language that are now out there that we can work with to get the second and third SS FRA grants and the prioritization process pilot program grant underway. Just for perspective, those 3 contracts total over $15 million of revenue. And that includes state match, but a chunk of that is going to consultants, but a portion of that is also going to cover MPO staff time. And that is my full report for this roughly quarter, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Tegan, thank you, and thank you for your flexibility in defining what a quarter means.
Thank
always
you.
Appreciated. And let me also just express my appreciation for all you do. I do think that the organization is in a better place today than it was when you started, I think 5 years ago, was it?
6.
6, but who's counting? Wow, 6. Wow. No, seriously.
Pandemic.
And like I said, getting the operations plan done, getting us on a cadence of an annual meeting, getting this committee sort of doing what it's supposed to do, just getting everybody to do what they're supposed to do puts less pressure on individual staff members and spreads it out across the board, which is what it's supposed to be. So I appreciate what you've been doing. I appreciate the outreach work you've been doing. I know my colleague Hannah Swidltowski said this at the MPO meeting last week, but it was great to see you at MMA. I started going to that 3 years ago, and it's been wonderful for my organization, and I think it will continue to be wonderful for the MPO staff. And let me highly encourage you to keep doing that. I think it's money well spent just on bumping into folks alone. It's amazing what can get accomplished in that, and I appreciate that. And I think, sharing Marty Milkovich and sharing the amazing staff with the research community is great. It's what we need to do. It's what we need to do to get the Boston MPO sort of name and brand out there, and I highly encourage it. This is not; these are not junkets. These are not tropical vacations where you're getting wined and dined. TRB is like the first week in January in Washington, D.C. I mean, I know, I've been there. It isn't all that fun, but it's really important, and I just want to continue to do that. And let me also just very briefly say I think we all totally support your DEI work. I know that's perhaps not the most popular thing to say these days in certain parts of the country, but I think it's important for our organization to continue to do it. Highly encourage you to do that. And the outreach that you've done to board members and to different subgroups, I also think is wonderful. So you certainly have my support as an individual board member in what you're doing. Thank you. And with that, I will open this up to questions. And Carl, I see your hand.
Great, thank you, Brian. Yeah, and thanks so much, Tegan. I think just to echo the importance of DEI, I think I can speak on behalf of the advisory council in affirming that, and also to dovetail to Brian's comment in terms of empowering staff to do their work, and supporting opportunities for professional development. I really do appreciate the kind of the process of multi-year planning, and it sounds like it's been really distributed among staff members. Just seems like a really great opportunity for folks to, or like in different ways, shapes, and forms. I've always thought about that of like being able to brag about the work that you do and to and be able to like kind of describe it in its best forms, which only helps to improve the presence and nature of MPO work. So just wanted to kind of like provide a brief like note of appreciation for that, as a process and your continued efforts in that respect.
Thank you. If I may, Brian, Carl, thank you for bringing that up in the multi-year plans. One of the other benefits that it's really had for us is that as a leadership team, we also always want to be bragging about all of the work that our staff are doing at the agency. And by coming together and reviewing all of the work at the agency together, it really, again, it increases our ability to promote and celebrate staff, even that don't normally report to us or that are doing work that we're not as familiar with. We're able to sort of communicate that much better now. So I think that's a serious responsibility of a leadership team, is to be able to do that.
Leonard Diggins, sir, go ahead, please.
Thank you. And I do have a bunch of questions, and I'll be monitoring the hands so that if someone raises their hand, I'll just stop Brian, and you can maybe acknowledge them and then come back to me, because I don't want to monopolize all the time that remains. So, of course, I appreciate you, Tegan, but I got a bunch of questions. So, for the first one is, at the end of your statement, your memo, you mentioned that there's $930,000 that we are going to try to contract to spend down. Would any of that be able to go to discrete studies?
So great question. And I didn't touch on this in my presentation, so I'm glad you brought it up. So this is deobligated PL funding. Just for people who aren't familiar, we have a balance year over year. We're always making sure that we're not overspending on our 3C PL contract. And so what that ends up meaning is that with staff attrition and other things, we're kind of creating a little bit of a significant balance now of funding that from the federal perspective remains available for the MPO to use for an additional 3 years. That's definitely a simplified version of how this works, but it's otherwise I'll spend the next 10 minutes talking just about that. So what we have started over the last couple of years, MassDOT has initiated a process where we can make proposals to access those funds, and MassDOT will consider then also providing the match for those funds. So there has to be a match, which means that also impacts MassDOT's budget for the year. So I just want to very much acknowledge that. However, in terms of using it for discrete studies, Len, in a way, yes. However, MassDOT's guidance and criteria that they employ when deciding whether or not to approve is that it cannot be used for staff time. So working with that constraint, that means that we're looking at the kinds of studies that may be discrete studies, but that we can bring in an external consultant to do the work. Then the challenge of that being we also still need to, as anybody who works with any of these kinds of contracts knows, it takes staff time to manage those contracts, and it detracts that staff time, not in a bad way, but from other things they may be on. So we will be proposing a couple of, I think, really interesting studies that would be in that space of addressing some of the discrete study ideas this year. But I just want to provide those caveats because we can't use it the way we would normally use the PL funding for a discrete study where staff would commit, a chunk of their time throughout the year to carry something out internally.
Well, since money is kind of fungible, and maybe if you spent it somewhere else, that might free up some money, for more discrete studies. The reason I'm pushing that is that I'm blending over a little bit to UPWP because I know that there's a big desire, to do the next phase of the congested pricing, and I'm resisting funding the thing fully because that would be all of the UPWP discrete studies budget. And so to the extent we can find some more money so we can do at least 3 studies, that's why I'm bringing this up. But so that's all. And I'll move on. So you mentioned in order to carry out.
Len, why don't I see Jen's hand? Do you mind?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I missed that. Go ahead.
And then we'll come back to you.
Yeah. Sure.
Oh, thanks, Len. Yeah, no, I just had a quick follow-up. I was curious about the for the deobligated funding, like the rationale for not allowing that to be used on staff time, is that because it's not as sustainable assumed as sustainable a source, or yeah, maybe that's something for MassDOT.
Yeah, I think I would want to defer. I don't want to speak for MassDOT. What I will say is that, staffing changes is a very fluid thing year over year. And so it's an interesting space to be talking about. But why don't I defer to Sam so that he can talk from MassDOT's perspective?
Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, Jen, the way that you phrased it is basically correct. Just that the rationale has been that that using this on staff time may not always be sustainable, and so these deobligated funds have been MassDOT has tried to steer them in other directions.
I guess let me just also jump in and add, and Sam, correct me if I'm wrong. There's no guarantee these funds will be available, right? They're deobligated, they're congressionally allocated, but what are the odds the president just says, no, we're not doing that?
I believe that's correct. I mean, there is a balance, but I do believe that the balance is available for 3 years. I believe it's like an average of the last 3 prior years. But I don't know the answer to that question exactly, whether Congress could claw that back.
Okay. I just don't want us to go too far down the road and get too excited about something that may or may not happen.
I can elaborate a little bit as well, because I've been doing a lot of work with AMPO nationally as well to sort of understand some of these issues. And I think, yes, something can always be clawed back. It would be a process to be able to claw it back. And what we have seen is that this is a pretty sustained balance. It's a little bit more complex than either of us are describing so far, in that MassDOT also taps into the oldest PL dollars first. So it's not as linear. You can't linearly calculate how much is available in terms of just what was left over from the last 3 years. So that, I know, Sam, you know that too, but it just complicates it a lot. And what I will say, though, is that our federal partners are recommending and pushing us to think about how to spend down those dollars. So in general, the feds want to see, in our experience, that balance spent down. So that's just another aspect of why we are trying to aggressively spend it down. I can highlight a few things. We spent actually a significant chunk of the remaining balance this year. We invested can't remember the amount, I'm sorry, but a couple $100,000 in hiring a consultant to help us do more with the development of the next travel demand model that we'll be using for the next long range plan update. So in ways, it's enabling us to do more with the money that we have.
Thank you very much. Leonard, I think we're back to you.
No problem. No, that was sparked much more conversation than I thought. I thought that might be like a 30-second, question. How much more time, do we have, Brian?
5 minutes, sir.
Okay. You said that in order to carry out the Safe Streets for All and 4P study activities, meaning the MP will need to recruit additional staff. That's going to be permanent staff?
That remains to be a question.
Okay.
This is something that we have been talking about and strategizing on. We did bring on additional staff to manage the first SS Freight contract, and that is a permanent staff person.
Yeah.
And again, these take place over multiple years, so it gives us some flexibility to consider: do we want a term person? Do we want a full-time person, permanent person or not? They haven't made decisions yet, but I can report back on that when we do.
All right. Thank you. And I support the multi-year plans that you're doing. There are 13 programs. Which for any organization is a lot. 13 plans. It's for one that is as small as us. Is impressive. Are there staff that work on multiple plans? So is there overlap between staff and plans?
That's a great question, and it depends on the plan. So when you talk about something like the multimodal infrastructure program, as well as the model development programs and the data program, those are actually really large in size and are sort of managed by one person, but really involve quite a few staff in terms of developing it. So the entire model development team, right, spends time on that program for model development. Then we have more programs that have a specific budget associated with them that's smaller in scale and that one person will manage and occasionally pull in the expertise of other people, but it's sort of more managed within that one person's space, I guess. So that an example of that might be like our performance-based planning program or our congestion management program. And what we're trying to do is make sure that those programs are really integrated and bolstering each other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll just say, and please forgive me if this seems like me, the kid who brings home an A and the parent goes, "Why no A plus?" But I was.
I never had that problem, Len.
I just kind of assumed that this kind of coordination was going on. I mean, much like I felt like, I mean, a lot of coordination between the MPO, and MassDOT, was or is going on. I mean, and so I mean, I'm happy this is happening, but like I just said, I mean, I just kind of assumed it was going on, and so of course I'm going to support this and any efforts to do more of it. So I'm going to stop there because I think we might have a couple other items, to do. But maybe I'll just leave with one because that was more of a statement. You can respond to it if you want. But you mentioned that a lot of people at the conference wasn't aware of the MPO. Do you have a sense of why that's the case? I mean, is it like staff just not aware of us? Because they confuse us with MAPC, or they're new, or what? That's it. Thank you.
It's a little bit of all of that. I find it amazing when I talk to some folks who are like on councils for, or a leader at a different municipality. It's like, oh, the MPO funds transportation projects. Like, you have funding. Sort of like not even fully aware of that like dynamic and availability. So it just is really clear to me that there's some people who absolutely know what the MPO is, but there's a lot of people who are newer to the field, don't focus only on transportation, just haven't been exposed to it yet. And we need to do more work to raise that awareness. But I could probably answer much longer, but it wouldn't be helpful. The other thing on the coordination, I'll just say is that you're absolutely right. There was coordination happening before, but it wasn't kind of robust and like culturally embedded in the agency's work. And that's what we're really trying to do, is make sure that it is like consistent and embedded, that coordination happens intentionally and repeatedly across all the programs. So we definitely would strive to do the A+, even if we're doing the A now. So I really support and appreciate you bringing that up and pushing for it. I appreciate it very much.
You're muted.
Thank you, and thank you, Brian.
All right, Len, you're good. Any final questions for Tegan before we have to break? Okay, seeing none, we don't have to vote to approve that. No, we don't. So Tegan, thank you for the update. We're on member items. Are there any member items? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Without objection, Jen, is that your hand up to adjourn or a question?
Second, but yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.